Let's look at the 2010 budget of the federal government to get a sense of where to begin. On the spending side, we have Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, Defense, all the other programs in the federal government, including law enforcement, education, agriculture, space and science, energy, and homeland security, to name just a few. And finally, interest on the national debt. That's everything. These programs, along with interest payments on the national debt, are known as mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is currently 62% of all federal spending and is the fastest growing part of the budget. These are all the other programs in the federal government and are called discretionary spending. They make up the remaining 38% of the federal budget. Okay, now, how do we pay for all this? Taxes. Let's look at our different revenue sources. Personal income taxes, payroll taxes, corporate income taxes, and other revenue. The rest? This is our budget deficit for the year. It's how much money America will need to borrow to pay for everything on the other side of this coin. When you're in a hole that you're trying to get out of, the first thing you need to do is stop digging. Serious budget reform is the first step in the right direction. The current budget process is not designed to address our overall fiscal challenge.
I think there's broad agreement that in a time of real deep recession that it's okay to run budget deficits, even big budget deficits. When the economy begins to recover, we really need to do something to make sure that we don't keep running even bigger budget deficits and adding to the debt.
The problem is really quite simple. Americans want lots of services from their government, and they have made promises in law that will mean higher federal spending in the future.
When we've had budget problems in the past, our leaders have done a better job of working together and enacting. During the 1990s, for example, tough budget controls, along with a growing economy, helped make fiscal responsibility a reality.
In a few moments, I will sign into law the first balanced budget in a generation.
Those budget controls helped take us from large and growing deficits to large and growing surpluses. But these controls expired in 2002, and the economy was recovering from a recession. The budget situation in Washington has been out of balance ever since.
Welcome back to IOUSA Solutions. Back to the film in a minute, but first, let's get back to a graphic here. Mandatory versus discretionary spending. It's nice that you want to balance the budget, right? But how do you do that? You can either raise taxes or cut spending, or a little from column A, a little from column B, a combination of all of these things. Let's look at this area in purple here. That's mandatory spending. We have to pay Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, as well as interest on the national debt. So the yellow area, that's discretionary spending, things like social programs, education, or we can cut defense spending. That's a tough sell, too, these days. Bill Bradley, you spent many years in Washington. You were elected to serve the people, and it's very difficult to make some of these tough choices and also continue to run in the election cycle, isn't it?
Yes, it is, unless there is a freight train coming at you that concentrates the mind. For example, in the early 1980s, Social Security was about to go bankrupt, and we had to act. And so Congress did act. And the way I always look at it, you go where the money is. And if you have this gigantic budget deficit, you go to programs for the elderly, you go to health care, you go to defense, and you go to interest. And those are, by 2016, going to be about 88% of the total federal budget. And so I look at this and I say, the key thing is to begin and to take action in those areas. Just for example, if we cut defense spending 10%, we would still spend twice as much as the following countries spend on defense combined: Russia, China, India, Germany, Britain, France. Now, I think we can have a fairly secure world and a secure society and not spend as much as we're spending on defense.
And you say we can fight modern battles without a Cold War kind of military. I mean, you're talking about making some different lines of thinking in defense spending.
Adjusting the force structure and the technology to the current threat as opposed to the Cold War threat. If we did that, we could save money. Under the guise of the Iraq War and Afghanistan, they find the defense budget on weapon systems going very high up, and it's not all for those areas.
But on the campaign trail, that's played by the opponent as soft on national security and look, we're going to be less safe because he wants to cut spending. It starts to get tricky when around the corner, the freight train that's coming at you is your election, not this crisis.
Well, the key thing is you can't do only defense. You have to also do the so-called entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, health care, civil service pensions,
right.
Things like that. If you distribute the pain broadly, what we found in the early 1980s was that people signed on for lengthening the age of retirement, to having taxes, to cutting some benefits, because it saved the larger system. That was Social Security then. Today, it's our whole economy that's at stake.
Right. Diane Lim Rogers from the Concord Coalition, the chief economist there, he said, disperse the pain broadly, but we've kind of been dispersing the wealth without giving anything back. We've had lots of tax cuts. We've had a lot of programs, Medicare Part D, for example, which was unfunded. We've been sort of spending prolifically, haven't we?
Giving away a lot of stuff without paying for it, and that's been the problem, is that we've been on an unsustainable spending path. And, our largest components of the federal budget, the biggest challenges that are on that unsustainable path, happen to be entitlement programs that we're quite fond of. And we're not quite willing to talk about ways to ratchet down that spending that don't sound just like cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. And unfortunately, even if we control defense spending better, and even if we cut all the waste, fraud, and abuse that's in the budget, it's not going to help our situation. So it doesn't prevent us from having to make tough choices. And there's a whole other side of the federal budget that we forget that we do a lot of spending on, and that's the tax side of the budget. That the tax system is actually not just there to raise the revenue to pay for our spending, but is actually there as a different way of spending the money. So we have a lot of tax preferences in the tax system, and we have to decide, are those preferences worth their cost, just like other ways that we directly spend money in the federal budget.
It's not impossible. It's been done before. We've had budget surpluses. We have cut the national debt. What our current leaders and policymakers can learn from the past to get us on a more sustainable path, that's next.